We are excited to have this guest with us. Francesca Iofreda is here, Vice President of Inclusion, Growth, and Talent Initiatives for the Greater Washington Partnership. Francesca joined the partnership in 2020 to launch the organization's Inclusive Growth Initiative and spearheads its efforts to advance shared prosperity and create the most diverse digital tech workforce in the country. In this capacity, Francesca led the partnership's $4.7 billion commitment to support minority business enterprises and underserved communities in the region through supplier diversity, access to capital, and racial equity investments. Also, she oversees Capital Collab, the collaboration of leaders in academia and business, an action-oriented partnership of businesses and academic institutions to scale solutions that address the capital region's most pressing talent needs, particularly equipping residents with the digital skills needed for the jobs of today and tomorrow. She has over 12 years of experience working across private and public sectors to foster economic competitiveness, promote diversity and inclusion, and develop innovative ecosystems. And she was recognized in the Washington Business Journal 40 Under 40 this year, Carpenter Theater. Please welcome Francesca Iofreda to the stage.
Thanks so much, Todd, for those kind words, your leadership, and for all of you for being here on a Friday. I'm honored to be among such esteemed speakers, and I'm very grateful for Chamber RVA for hosting such an important event and bringing the community together. I'm looking forward to moderating a panel with Richmond-based leaders that are addressing the biggest challenges our region faces around inclusive growth. But before I do so, I want to take a few minutes to introduce myself and the work that we're doing at the Greater Washington Partnership that I think will provide a good framework for this discussion. As Todd mentioned, my name is Francesca Iofreda. I'm the Vice President for Inclusive Growth and Talent Initiatives at the partnership. And for those that are not familiar with the partnership, I want to spend a few minutes telling you about who we are. We are a civic alliance of the region's largest employers, and our mission is to make the capital region, which we define as from Baltimore to Richmond, the best place to live, work, start a business, and start a family. We're focused on equitable economic development. And our origin story actually has its roots in a failed Olympic bid, where many of our region's leaders came together to put forth a proposal to host the Olympics in our backyard in 2024. And while that was ultimately unsuccessful, they did see the value in taking this cross-jurisdictional approach to collaboration, thinking at a super regional scale, and addressing the issues that are holding our region back. Since that moment, we've been up and running. Here you'll see a smattering of the organizations that comprise our board members, including Dominion Energy, Bank of America, Capital One, the Better Housing Coalition, to name just a few. And we're so happy to be joined by many of those organizations in today's discussion. We like to think of ourselves as an action catalyst, really addressing those transformational issues that will allow our region to be the most competitive and dynamic in the nation. We do work in three major areas: skills and talent, as Todd mentioned, really focused on creating the most diverse digital tech ecosystem. And we focused on digital skills because that's where there's a clear gap in our region. And we know these are jobs that are more likely to pay a family-sustaining wage, less likely to be automated, and where there are clear racial equity gaps. The second, regional mobility and infrastructure. As everyone here, I'm sure, can attest, with missed metros, buses, hours and hours in traffic, this is really fundamental to being a competitive region, making sure that we can promote equitable, accessible transit access. And lastly, inclusive growth. This has really become the frame for all that we do at the partnership. But it's focused on how we create shared prosperity and close the equity gaps in our region, with which Raj Shetty talked about so eloquently. So when we kicked off this effort around 2 years ago, it was in the wake of George Floyd's murder, COVID-19 exacerbating structural inequities, and we realized that we didn't have all the answers. In fact, there are organizations that have been doing this work on the ground for decades in our communities. But we also knew that the private sector had a more important role to play to lean in and advance equitable growth. And we wanted to have a strategy to be able to rally and corral individuals around. So we embarked on a one-year effort to create a regional blueprint for inclusive growth. What is that? It's a 10-year roadmap to close the equity gaps in our region and make us the most inclusive economy. It engaged over 200 cross-sector stakeholders in the process, and what differentiates it is that it's the first private sector-led agenda for advancing growth in this region. And it also takes a holistic and interconnected approach. We know that you can't foster economic development by addressing it in a siloed fashion. Any individual's life relies on accessible transit, high quality and safe housing, healthcare, good education. And so we wanted to bring that to bear in this blueprint. So here you'll see the 6 pillars that we've outlined. And I think what's so exciting about this blueprint effort and today's conversation is that the recommendations in our framework is so aligned with Chamber RVA and the broader Richmond communities, focus on creating more healthy, prosperous, and equitable communities. I won't get into all of the recommendations, but I hope you'll spend some time looking through the blueprint later today or this weekend as you're taking cover from the rain. But I did want to show an example of the types of solutions that are put forth in the blueprint. We know that there's an abundance of potential solutions, but we wanted to really narrow in, taking a data-driven approach on where there's the most opportunity for the private sector working in concert with the public and social sectors to advance change, given the challenges in our region and the opportunities. So here you'll see across the 6 pillars some of those recommendations. And we're so fortunate that our speakers today will cover 3 of these pillars: education, housing, and transportation and infrastructure. So you'll hear directly on how they're working on these issues in the Richmond community. So before I open it up to our speakers, I wanted to tell you a little bit about our journey. As I mentioned, this was a 1-year effort engaging cross-sector stakeholders across our region, and we really took a phased approach to doing it. We wanted to make sure that we had the right framework, that we were thinking about the pillars in the correct way. So we started with the ideation and insight gathering to be able to identify some initial solutions and recommendations. We published a preface report to the blueprint, really to continue to solicit the community's reaction. In phase 2, we sought expertise from groups on the ground that are doing this work: elected officials, business leaders, nonprofit leaders. We conducted one-on-one interviews. We held focus groups with each of the pillar areas so that we could be able to pare back, prioritize the different solutions, and also the case studies that we were bringing to bear in this blueprint effort. That led to the publication in June with input from over 200 stakeholders. And now we're in this 3rd phase, which is socialization and implementation. We at the partnership know that we can't lead on every one of those recommendations that you just saw, but we will continue to lean in on the areas where we do work: supplier diversity, infrastructure, workforce development. But we're also talking to communities around our super region, including Chamber RVA and so many of you here today, around those that may want to take a leadership role or be able to adapt the blueprint to their own metropolitan area's needs. And we also know that the best laid plans fail if there's not a way to track and measure progress. So that's why we launched an Inclusive Growth Regional Dashboard, which we hope you'll also spend some time exploring, to be able to see how our region is faring across these pillars, across the racial equity gaps. And our audience is meant to be all of you and everyone else. We think by taking and highlighting data will allow private sector to be able to invest where there's the most need, public sector to develop the appropriate policies, and nonprofit organizations to develop programs and efforts that help address our most vulnerable communities. So I'm going to now moderate this panel, but I would love for you, if you have your phone, to scan this QR code so that you're able to explore the blueprint in greater depth. What we've tried to do in the blueprint is highlight what these solutions, what the challenges are, and what you'll see is many case studies from the Richmond MSA about this work that's happening on the ground, including from some of our speakers momentarily. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So let me introduce our panel to you all. They're going to spend some time now with Francesca. First, we've got Javon Burton, Executive Director for the Partnership for Housing Affordability, Kevin Carroll, Chair of the Central Virginia Transportation Authority, and Ann Brody Pays, CEO of 5 Birth to 5. So they're going to spend some time in a conversation, but you all, once again, as they are talking, get to ask some questions. So go to menti.com, there is a code 1167-6166, and please ask your questions and then we'll flow them into this conversation. So I will hand it to you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Todd, and thank you all for being here today. We're going to start by asking each of you to share a specific example of your organization's efforts to improve the Richmond community and how you prioritize equity in that work. So, Jovan, let's start with you.
Thank you. And so by way of introduction, the Partnership for Housing Affordability really strives to increase access to opportunity through housing in three main ways. That's through partnerships, research, and policy. And I think a great program of ours that really illustrates that work in the Richmond region and improving our community is a program that we have that serves effectively as a hotline for folks that are experiencing housing instability. And it's really the first line of defense for anyone facing anywhere from an eviction to needing rental assistance or needing an affordable place to rent, or maybe they're thinking about taking the first step towards homeownership and they're not sure where to go. It provides that essential navigation with a short-time intervention. And that program would not exist, nor would it thrive without partnerships. More than 50 service providers here in the housing space or housing adjacent who work directly with clients who are in crisis, who are facing unimaginable circumstances. Additionally, that provides real-time data. I can't think of any other programs that we have that gives us an understanding of what residents are dealing with on a daily basis. We've talked a lot about this morning, big data and how that can identify opportunity gaps, but I think big data is best used and leveraged when it's paired with lived experience. And that's exactly what we have with the resource line, where we can understand down to a zip code level where housing instability is most concentrated, who it's impacting the most. And I think all of us probably have some assumptions about where those challenges are located. We've seen the maps, but what we've seen in the past few years is that housing is not an issue that can be otherized to just certain communities in our region anymore. It's something that we see on a daily basis where there's a lot of zip codes and neighborhoods that you probably wouldn't expect that have dozens of people who are calling in that are facing an eviction or they're unsure of where they can find somewhere that they can afford to rent. So that program was born out of necessity, born out of crisis in the COVID-19 pandemic. And since that time period, it's served over 13,000 households here across the region. So I think that having that collective action and those partnerships is really important, and it helps to inform the policy work that we do. So from an equity standpoint, we constantly think about, do policies in the housing space that we're pursuing, do they advance racial equity? Are they things that focus on marginalized communities and looking at the disparities of today and how historic actions have shaped them and continue to shape them? And can we be as intentional with our policies as previous disparities were in being created?
Kevin?
That was good. So the CVTA was started a couple of years ago by legislation passed by the General Assembly. Truth of the matter is, Richmond, Central Virginia, we couldn't compete with Northern Virginia or the Tidewater area for dollars when you talk about matching funds between what we put out for local transportation dollars against what those regions were doing, because they were putting more money into the pots to actually get more money from the state. So now, with the Central Virginia Transportation Authority, the way it's structured, 50% of the local dollars that come in through the tax revenue goes back to the locality. 35% goes into a regional pot to use for regional transportation projects, and 15% goes directly to fund GRTC. So when we talk about an equity issue, GRTC, we all know the bus lines that we have here. They're currently doing a multimodal study right now on regional transportation and how we can actually best serve the community, not just through busing, but through other ways. And we look forward to the results of that study and how the additional dollars that GRTC gets now through the CVTA and how that can be used to help expand regional transportation, not just from the outlying jurisdictions, but certainly through the center here. One of our first projects that we funded to the tune of $104 million is the Ashland to Petersburg Trail, or as we like to say, maybe the Petersburg to Ashland Trail, the fall line, right? That's going to be a spectacular opportunity for the regional community. It'll bring economic development from north to south. And it'll also give opportunities for people to get out and explore different parts of the region, get exercise. And it'll also bring probably economic development to these areas because there are going to be restaurants and other amenities needed to serve the people who come and utilize the fall line. As an example, if you live down in the Petersburg, Ettrick area, you can actually take the train from Ettrick in Chesterfield up to Ashland, get off with your bike, and when this project is done, be able to ride all the way back down and enjoy the whole way, all the way from Ashland, all the way through Hanover, through Richmond, through Chesterfield, and then all the way back to where you came from. So, but the money that we're using on that 35% pot that goes to the regional projects, part of the problem, we haven't had the opportunity to compete. Now we passed a $276 million regional transportation project list for the next 4 years. And on top of that, another $100 million dedicated to help with the 64 winding project. And so there are projects from all 9 jurisdictions that get affected by that regional pot, as well as the 50% dollars. And so transportation issues that have been lingering that have not been addressed, trust me when I tell you this, they're coming. The money's there, the projects have been approved, and they're in the design phase now, and we'll see them come out of the ground shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Ann?
Hi, Thrive Birth to 5 is the regional systems builder for early childhood education, and we're also designated the Ready Region Central by the Virginia Department of Education. There are 26,000 children in subsidized care under 5 in this region, and that represents 1,500 classrooms, yet 42% of the kids are entering kindergarten unprepared. So Thrive Birth to 5 is addressing this with a 2-pronged approach. It's quality and access. Quality is with a unified quality measurement tool, and we're going into every classroom that receives subsidy. And the most important quality of that is interaction between the child and the teacher. And we see returns on early childhood education, but more in high quality early childhood education. That's 13% by not repeating a grade, fewer special ed placements, and more work. And then we're complementing that with access. And to put a framework on this, VCU's tuition this year is about $15,500. A year of childcare costs almost that much, about $15,000. So we have all kinds of policy for higher education. We have financial aid, we have 529 plans, we have scholarships, but that is really inaccessible to parents and families dealing with early childhood care. So the parents and families are frustrated, they're overworked, overtaxed, and we have to really facilitate the process for families to access childcare. So really, we are partnering with the public schools, with private providers, and we're creating a no wrong door approach for families to access childcare. So we have to focus on transformations, not tweaks.
Thanks so much, Anne. That's a stunning statistic to hear about the cost. And thank you all for sharing the important work you're doing and really help us take a nuanced view and understand the challenges in the community. So, Javon, I'm going to start with a question for you. As we've heard multiple times today, and as you alluded to, there's real power in collective action. So can you share more about your organization's journey to create Richmond's regional housing framework, and especially your effort to ensure public sector commitment across county lines?
Absolutely. So for those of you who do not know, the Richmond Regional Housing Framework effectively serves as our region's housing strategy. What makes it unique is that it's solutions-oriented, but more importantly, that we have local government buy-in from the very beginning, and local government was represented at every step of the way. And I think that was critical to having a recognition that housing challenges extend beyond jurisdictional lines. This is not something that we can just address in silos and locality by locality. And I think going back to big data and how that can identify opportunity gaps, that's really how the regional housing frameworks was conceived. In this case, the eviction data that demonstrated that Richmond had the second highest eviction rate in the country, and then 5 of the top 10 cities in Virginia. So that galvanized our philanthropic community and our local governments. And I think since that time period, we've seen a tremendous, momentous shift and focus on housing at the local level. And that's evidenced by identifying dedicated sources of revenue, zoning changes to make it easier to build multifamily housing, designating things like a land bank to convey properties for first-time home ownership for low-income buyers. So we've seen all of that, and I think a takeaway that I hope you all have from today is that the groundwork has been laid in the region. We don't need to devise new plans or to think of innovative solutions that haven't been thought of or to fund more research to understand the issue deeper. I can promise you we've researched this issue to death in our housing space, and we do it on a recurring basis. So the groundwork is laid, and housing is really one of the only issues that I know where we already know the solutions. The solutions aren't in question. It's really a matter of the collective will to act on those solutions. And so I think just looking holistically at our region and our future, it's really asking those fundamental questions of what do we want Richmond to look like moving forward. We know people want to live here. People love to work here. Domestic migration numbers show that people are moving here from elsewhere. We've long had the perception of being a place where it's much more cost effective to live, work, and play. But that window of opportunity is vastly closing here in the region. Rent increases in the Richmond region since 2017 have outpaced the entire state of Virginia and the DC metro area. Not only that, 4 of the 5 most common occupations here in the region cannot afford the median rent as it stands today and the median single-family home sales price. So that's a big concern for us, but it's also a tremendous opportunity. It's a way to look at this to say, we can act on this. We know the solutions. We just have to do so with a sense of urgency.
Thanks, Javon. That's a really inspiring call to action and really emphasizes the urgency of addressing some of these issues. Kevin, you mentioned the significance of reliable, equitable transportation in advancing Virginia's full potential and increasing competitiveness. So what does the Transportation Authority have in store to improve residents' well-being in the counties that you serve?
Well, as I said a few minutes ago, we have a bunch of transportation projects that are going to be coming out of the ground that are going to help with our ability to get from one place to the other, whether it is if you like to exercise and you want to use a fall line trail, or if you like to use public transportation. You know, Chesterfield County has a program called Access Chesterfield. So if you need a ride somewhere, you can call up, make an appointment, and they come and get you, similar to an Uber program. So hopefully we'll see some, and most of the other local 9 jurisdictions that are part of the CVTA all have similar programs, but perhaps we can have them fall into GRTC sometime in the future and maybe get a better product or a better price on for the people. But the reason transportation is key, when you have big companies, and I'm going to talk about a few right now that are coming to the region, for example, Lego, who just signed to come into Chesterfield. When you have big companies like that, that provides big economic opportunity, not just for Chesterfield County, but for the entire region. There are going to be our kids working there from all over Central Virginia that'll have an opportunity to get a job. But the 9, and it's not just the local jurisdictions, we also have other companies that are part of the CVTA, but the one thing that I think that the CVTA has done that maybe we didn't do so well in Central Virginia before is we put politics aside, and we've said we're going to work collectively to solve these problems that we have facing us, because when we can solve the transportation problems, then these big companies and small companies, remember 90% of our business is small business. So we have people moving in the region. They're going to utilize our small business. They need a place to live, so we've got to work on that. They need a place to go to school, so we have to make sure the education component is there. And we have to make sure we can get them from A to B. And so the transportation projects that are going to come out of the ground, they're going to make a big difference. And if you've ever driven to Virginia Beach, for example, on 64, when you get on the eastern side of James City County, it's nice, it's beautiful, it's wide, and you can actually move. And with the widening project that we're working with the state on for that's going to go from Richmond to the other side of James City County, about 29 miles, that'll improve transportation both to the beach and in the case of evacuations back. And we get some other big projects that we're working on. Ploy Parker Extension is one that we'll be talking about in the future, which is key for the region as well. So these transportation projects are coming.
Such great examples, Kevin. I know amongst the partnership organizations, the number one issue that are facing employers is being able to get qualified workers. And one of the key constraints to doing so is the transportation system in many parts of our region. So we really appreciate you shining the light on that issue. And I think we've heard today extensively the importance of early childhood education and really where you live, especially in those early years of life. So can you tell us a little bit more, given Thrive Birth to Five's long-standing model of cross-sector collaboration among school systems, government officials, private sector, and nonprofits? What impact has this had on Richmond's early childhood education ecosystem? And then maybe a recommendation that you would provide to leaders to make sure that cross-sector collaboration can be the most effective and impactful.
Thanks. We have been working on this a long time, and it is really important to emphasize how long it takes to build the relationships. So we have to build radical trust between public schools, private providers, families, and government officials. And we really have to involve the families and parents and the providers. And they already have the solutions. Like what Jovan said, we have the solutions. We just have to implement them. And we've already done a lot of the research. So first suggestion, use your families and the people who would use your services and the providers. And no victory is too small to celebrate. We have to celebrate the incremental steps along the way, and that we can get more children in childcare, or we can provide more subsidies. Those are celebrations worth having.
Thanks so much, Anna. I think it's so important to recognize wins along the way, especially when we're trying to address these long-standing structural systems issues. So earlier we spoke about the interconnectedness of all of these issues: education, housing, transportation, health, and that they are all needed to create an inclusive and equitable economy. So we'd love to hear from each of you about how you think of your work as part of a broader effort and not just in a vacuum around advancing inclusive growth in this region.
So I'll start, and I'll just speak from a housing standpoint. We take the position that housing is foundation of the quality of life, but we understand that other things feed into that. So we've done a lot of studies around seeing where many of our lower paying jobs are located in the region, and then where housing is located for individuals who can work those jobs, and seeing the gap between the two. So that plays a role with how do folks get access to those jobs in terms of transportation. If you look at Short Pump, for example, 1 in 10 workers who work in Short Pump actually live in Short Pump. So their ability to do so is obviously constrained by things like affordability, but also potentially transportation. So I think the interconnectedness between these issues is very clear. As another example, to go back to the resource line that we operate, when we began that program, it was September of 2020. So we were still in the virtual learning environment for many schools. During that time period, we began to see an uptick in calls from school faculty and teachers who were finally seeing for the first time some of the conditions that some of their students were living in, but also now learning in, and recognizing that that's probably not a sustainable place for a child to be learning and or living. And so we were getting calls, concern from teachers about what exactly can we do in this scenario, or from hospital staff who have patients that are in there and going to be discharged soon and have no idea where they're going to live or who's going to pick them up or what's going to happen with them when they leave the hospital. So we see this on a daily basis and how housing impacts all the other facets of quality of life that we're talking about.
As I said, when you talk about the economic development part of this, when these big companies are looking and competing across the United States, looking where they're going to come to, they look for workforce, look for workforce diversity. Do we have the children that are coming out of our educational programs that are actually qualified to work these jobs? And so they have found that the Richmond area is a very attractive market. And then they look at, like you said, affordable housing, right? So if they do need to come here and they're going to work here, then they have the affordable housing. So we need to make sure that we can get people from point A to point B, because, for example, the western part of Hull Street, I'll talk about that for a minute. We've had tremendous growth during the last 10 years, almost over 14,500 people moved in the western part of Hull Street from 288 West. Well, we've got a wide room out there to actually handle the transportation load. And then we just approved to amend our transportation package to allow for Goochland to utilize some monies that they need to increase an intersection, which is directly related to a big economic development project that will bring over 500 jobs to the region. So, we need to solve the transportation issues so that the quality of life is there, so people are not sitting in traffic and going, oh my God, it's going to take 30 minutes to get from here to there, and I'm only going on a half mile. So collectively, we're all working together to try to find solutions to do that for each one of our regions and make sure that we allocate the funds appropriately. And I really have to commend all of the partners in the CVTA, because I really think we've done well to do that over the last 2 years.
Great, thank you.
Well, one thing that is common to all of us is workforce, and we are seeing considerable tension between breadwinning and caregiving. And parents need accessible childcare when they need it and they can afford it. And we're really driving women out of the workforce, and that is reducing diversity and experience. So we really want to emphasize how important childcare is to workforce for all of us. And we really need to work collaboratively to support families. That is not only childcare, that is health, education, transportation, housing, and we need to better communicate amongst ourselves.
Great. Thank you for those examples. I think all of those comments really exemplify the interplay between all of these different issues, and I think highlight the importance of data, the importance of leaning in and advancing proven solutions, and then also bringing the human element and the human story, because at the end of the day, that's what really makes it tangible, is to understand how this impacts an individual life. I know we're going to open it up to some audience questions here soon, but before we do, we'd love to hear from each of you. For those in the audience today, how can they get involved with or champion your work so that we can work together as a collective towards a better future for Richmond?
Well, I'll just start by, I know that I mentioned that in the housing space, at the very least, we know the solutions that we need to address. I'd be remiss if I didn't at least delve into that a little bit. And I think it's important to probably just start small in the sense of not overwhelming everyone with all the things that we can do. So one solution that has been successful elsewhere, Madison County in Wisconsin actually created a workforce housing fund. And that was completely something that was done by their corporate community. They had a recognition that their ability to have a stable workforce hinges upon people being able to live in that region. So they had a goal of raising $10 million in 2020 amongst their corporate anchors within their region. And they actually ended up raising about $11.85 million to go towards gap financing for future affordable housing or mixed income developments. So if there's a for-profit developer or nonprofit that needs gap financing for a project, and without that gap financing, maybe that deal doesn't go through, then that funding can go towards that project. And they've leveraged that funding to create over 541 units just in 2 years. So that's an example from a corporate standpoint, from a business community standpoint, of how they can play a role in this issue, and recognizing that it's not all on local governments. It certainly is not all in the nonprofit sector. It requires all of us to play in this space in order to really make a large impact.
Thanks. I think it's important for community engagement, and there are, like I said, 9 regional jurisdictions, and then the GRTC sits on the board. We have someone from the airport, the Port of Virginia, legislators. So the community, one of the things that I always tell people is, I can't fix problems I don't know about. Right. So as people from the community bring problems forward to us and bring them to us to address, then we can target that specific area and say, what do we do next? But one of the things we really have to do is have vision to look down the road and say, okay, for as an example, how many housing developments or how many projects are going to come out of the ground in a specific area in the next 5 to 10 years? And look at those numbers, and how's it going to address our ability to have housing? How's it going to address our ability to have education and schools in place to service that? And then what do we need to do to prepare for infrastructure projects to improve that area? And getting community input on that is key.
Great.
Well, first, you can interact with every child. You can read a book. You can interact with that child who is smiling at you in the grocery store. So let's start really small. Then you can write a letter to your legislators. Tell them what you've heard today. This is really important that we are already working towards regional solutions. And I would like you to consider as employers how you can include childcare in your employee benefits, or consider having an on-site childcare facility. And give us the flexibility with our philanthropy to innovate and develop new solutions. I think with those steps, all our children can thrive, and we can make race, place, and income no longer the factors that determine success in school.
Thanks so much. Those are all great examples for how the community can engage with your work. And thank you all for submitting questions. I have a question for each of you. Javon, this builds off Raj Chetty's presentation from earlier today. But what resources exist for low or middle class individuals to have access to those high opportunity areas that we know are so critical to upward mobility?
Thank you for the question. So I guess what resources currently exist to help move to opportunity? Dr. Raj Chetty mentioned that every jurisdiction or every region in the country has a housing choice voucher program that is designed to help move to opportunity. That's not always how it works out in practice, and in the current climate where units are at a premium, it's actually very easy for individuals who have those that level of assistance to not actually move to those areas of opportunity because they can't really compete with the rents. The vouchers actually won't allow you to rent there if it's too high, or if there are just other renters who maybe are more competitive and have more income. And so we're seeing that happen quite a bit here in the region. But from a development standpoint, the low-income housing tax credit is the number one way that affordable housing gets built, not just in the Richmond region, but across the country, and has been so since about 1990. It's the main program that we have, but it's dependent upon how many applications we get in the region that are able to compete better than other developments across the state. And so that's going to waver from year to year. We need a lot more than that. It currently provides a lot of units here in the region over a 10-year period, over a 20-year period, but we need a lot more help.
Thank you. Kevin, with the new revenue provided through the CDTA, how much will the transportation project backlog be decreased?
Well, there's a big backlog. There is. I mean, and it's not just, it's all across the region. But I think a good step forward with the $276 million, some of those projects were actually fully funded with CBTA dollars. So the ones that are fully funded can actually come out of the ground quicker. Many of the projects were submitted in competition with something called Smart Scale, which is a state funding mechanism that the state matches dollars to dollars that localities put up. CBTA, it's going to take several years, actually many more years moving forward, to try and get caught up on all the projects. Because, with 30 projects that were approved by the CBTA in April for this first round, and they'll be funded over the next 4 years in the PAYGO system. 90% of the money will be used to pay for these projects, and 10% will be put in a reserve fund, a contingency fund, in case we need to address some of these issues. And we may have to go back and tweak our pay model on this to maybe issue some revenue bonds to cover some of the projects, because I expect that all the projects that we submitted in April are probably going to cost more because of inflation as we move forward. And so we're together collectively working on that to look at our financial model and be prepared to make adjustments to do that. It's going to take a bite, but we still have some big projects to deal with. And so, but it's progress that we would not have made regionally. I truly believe this. If we did not have the creation of the CBTA to get those regional funds, because the 7.7 cents per gallon on gasoline that gets charged, there's a lot of people that come through the Richmond region, 95 north and south, 64 east and west, that get fuel here. And that's money that would not come to a region to help us with transportation that we didn't get before.
That's a really good point, and thank you for those insights. And why are you confident the new regional entities will strengthen early childhood development?
Thank you. We are focused with laser-like focus on quality, and that will promote equity between private providers, public schools, and for anyone of any income. And the previous solution was that anyone could choose to participate. This is going to be a mandated process, and it will effectively lift up the providers who have families receiving subsidy in their care, and will make the salaries higher for child care employees. And that is so important to keep the best people working in early childhood care and education.
Definitely, thank you. And the questions keep coming, so thank you all. So Javon, back to you. Is it common for private developers to fund or build affordable housing?
There certainly are private builders, private meaning for-profit in this case. We certainly have the numerous private nonprofit partners who build affordable housing on a yearly basis. And I saw that there was a question a little bit earlier after your presentation about what can be done and the notion of requiring affordability in each development. We unfortunately don't have that ability here in Richmond because of state legislature exemptions that we do not have that other localities have across the state. And what we can do is have voluntary programs where we can incentivize developers who don't typically do affordable development to include affordability in their projects. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity to do that through economic development. I know that shopping center redevelopment and larger scale economic deals is becoming a big trend here in the region, and that's something that our jurisdictions have been really successful in. And I think there's an opportunity to prioritize affordability in those developments to ensure that when you're having mixed-use development and retail right there, if folks who are working there could also have the opportunity to live there, that would be critical moving forward, especially given transportation is likely to be sited near where those developments are going to be taking place.
So, absolutely. Thanks, Javon. And back to you, a data question. What specific success indicators are most compelling when one is advocating for quality initiatives in early childhood development?
The most important is quality interactions between children and teachers. That is critically important. We are also seeing we need to use a vetted curriculum, and we need to also have a great environment for the children to be in. That's clean. That is also engaging and having things this size for children. So we have a lot of indicators for success, but the most important is quality interactions between children and teachers.
Thank you. And more questions. The audience is very interested in affordable housing, Javon, and in particular, how you're thinking about affordable housing for the Diamond District and City Center here in Richmond.
Well, obviously that follows the trend of these larger scale economic development deals in which you can have mixed income communities. And I think that that's an example of that, where you'll have affordability that's included there, and particularly having individuals who have vouchers and are some of our lower income individuals, and having the opportunity to be living where you're going to have tremendous amount of economic opportunity, retail, and quality of life. And so the more that we can have that, I think it's critical. We do have for-profit partners that work in this space and that are committed to it. The reality is that it's much more difficult to do affordable development than it is to not. And so how do we think about how we can incentivize that and prioritize it as a region from a local government standpoint, but also from a philanthropic and corporate standpoint? I think if we are all hands on deck along those lines, then we can see more folks who are willing to take a dive in and figure out how to make these deals work. I think that we do have a lot of folks in the for-profit development sector that want to do it on the homeownership side and on the rental side, but it's a matter of, is the juice worth the squeeze in those instances? So the Diamond District is a great example of how that can be done.
Great, and I'd like to pick up on that thread. I think as we've heard from our speakers and throughout today, it's really the importance of cross-sector collaboration, and that no one actor can solve these seemingly intractable challenges alone. So we'd love for you all to share a little bit about how public and private investment can be combined to scale these sorts of efforts and programs. If anyone wants to jump in.
Okay, when we talk about, I'll use the public property as an example. There is a possibility in the future that we could do what we call a public-private partnership on a way to fund and build that road. It's a very expensive road to build. We could have almost $750 million. And public-private partnerships have happened all across the state. The issue for me, for us, from the Chesterfield side of this, is that we already have a 75-cent toll on our section of the public property in Chesterfield, and quite frankly, I think people don't like tolls. But there's next doors, right? They got to hit a nerve there, and so people even traveling there now coming down into Richmond, I think I was on the toll booth yesterday with 70 cents, right? So, but there is a way to do a public-private partnership and still maintain a very low-cost toll in order to be able to leverage money. That wouldn't be my first preference. My first preference would be to leverage funds in other ways. So, for example, utilizing the 75-cent toll that we have now, knowing what it generates about $11 million a year. That money can actually be leveraged to issue bonds that could be utilized to actually fix the road and extend the road in Chesterfield. So there is a limited opportunity within the transportation arena to do this, but when you do those public-private partnerships, you're putting a toll on a road for almost 75 to 100 years. You literally could have someone born today, the toll goes on, and they will die before the toll comes off. And so I'm not a big fan of that.
Thanks. And did you want to add anything?
Our public-private partnerships are really valuable because we have tons of slots going unused that we get from the federal and state government. So we can use private providers to fill publicly funded slots for children. And that is the most efficient way that we can get more kids in childcare. So we still need private investment and philanthropy to deal with infrastructure, but we have a lot of the funding to effectively partner with public and private entities.
Thanks so much, Ann.
Can I add one last thing to that? We talk about the developers that actually come in and do these communities. What a lot of people may or may not know is that all the infrastructure that they put in there, roads, water, sewer, they pay for all that when they do it. And then the water and sewer lines get turned over to the locality. They don't get anything back for that. Every house, which affects the price point of the house, has a number attached to it for a hookup for water and sewer. And so there is a lot of public-private partnerships going on right now in all these developments where the developers who are coming in and investing in our communities are the ones actually paying for this. And then in some localities, certainly there are off-site proffers that are offered to also help with other transportation needs. So there is other collaboration going on.
Thanks for that, Kevin. And we'll actually stay on you because our audience member is imagining what would RVA look like if you had regular high-speed rail with 1 hour service between Main Street and Union Station, and what that would mean potentially for housing and employment in Richmond. Could you comment a little bit on that? Yeah, and then Joel.
That would be amazing. I'd like to use that too. That again, we talked about future projects, about what we may end up partnering with the state on. That could be a project down the road. Right now, we've got, like I said, for the next 4 years, 5 years, we've got our prioritization projects in place. But what about high-speed rail, not just from north to south, but east to west? And I do think that in the future, that's something we're going to have to take a look at. Not just because of the population center, but also where the jobs are, right? So if we have, for example, growth out of 64, I know that there are several companies that are coming out there. Well, then it's not just about putting cars on the road. It's maybe about how can we move people to those jobs, back and forth to home, without having to put cars on the road. So it's all part of the future.
Absolutely. Javon, did you want to add anything?
Sure. Just going back to the connection between transportation and housing, transit-oriented development is something that happens quite a lot across the country, particularly when you have things like light rail or high-speed rail or other forms of transportation. Something we're seeing more and more, particularly in the city of Richmond, that they've paid particular attention to. How are we coordinating transportation increases and expansions with ensuring that along that we're having more housing that gets built. But again, it all comes back to intentionality and can we ensure that the housing is accessible for the individuals who maybe will need that transportation, will need access to the jobs that are self-sustaining, but also that many of our most common employees work at.
Great. Thanks so much. And we could go on all day, but we are coming up on time. So to close this out, we'd love to do a lightning round with each of our speakers. Tell us what you love about Richmond and what gives you optimism for the future for this community.
I'll start. I'm still pretty new to Richmond. Only here about 5 years. So what I love is it's the accessibility. I mean, one of the things that I thought about coming out of college and being a young professional was, where can I go that doesn't seem too overwhelming for me? And Richmond, for me at least, fit that bill, where I didn't feel like if I was living in Henrico that the city of Richmond was too far away or too inaccessible, but that there are tons of things to do. And I really appreciate the quality of life that's offered from a professional standpoint, but also looking at our park systems and the accessibility to those. As someone who likes to be pretty active in a lifestyle outside of work, I think that Richmond affords that, and I think a lot of our population numbers bear that out. We're seeing more and more people, particularly in the last 2 years during the pandemic, that want to move here from elsewhere, and I think that's part of the reason why.
So I'm not going to limit it to just Richmond, because I think the whole region offers a different taste of different things depending on what you want. If you go up to Ashland, for example, if you want that small town home feel, right? There's certain parts of the whole region, Chesterfield, for example, we have the largest state park with Pocahontas State Park. But I think what makes Central Virginia so attractive, and I moved here myself in '86, is that we're not far from the beach. You want to go to the beach. We're not far from the mountains. You want to go to the mountains. But there's so much to do here. We have so many great mom and pop restaurants, as an example, to go to. No matter what kind of food you want to get, you can go get it at night. Certainly great venues like this for entertainment. If you want to go out at night to go to entertainment, it's just really great. There's so many different things to do, and it's a really wonderful part of the country to live. The climate is great. And the other thing is the people are great. I mean, that's the one thing that I've always taken back. I was a police officer for 32 years, but the communities that we serve, the people that we serve, they just want to have a good life, similar to what we were talking about earlier today. Live, work, and play, quality of life, and I really think that this part of the country provides that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that.
Well, I also enjoy the outdoor spaces, and I think that's really a key factor in Richmond. But I also appreciate the emphasis on small businesses. And we see that a lot of that in childcare. And I think everyone rallies around those small businesses. That really gives me optimism for the future. And I love living in Richmond.
Fantastic. This is indeed a special place, as evidenced by bringing the community together on a rainy Friday. And it's such an important conversation in all of our leaders here today. So thank you so much for participating in the panel, for sharing in your expertise, your optimism, your hope for the future, and also some of the challenges. I think we have a great road ahead, and we'll be better and stronger by working together. So thank you all also for your engagement in the audience. Appreciate it.